So I've been looking at some numbers lately, and 330 million states. In January, 160 million of those people were employed. Since then, 30 million people have been laid off. That's more than 1 in 6 Americans that have been laid off since the beginning of this COVID. I could go over a lot of other economic numbers, but I won't bore you with them. I think you get it. You're watching it. You're seeing this lockdown. You're seeing the economic numbers. We live in a time, in an economic time as Americans, that it would be easy for us to simply take that government check, walk over into the corner, crawl up into the fetal position, begin sucking our thumbs, not knowing what to do next. Can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, can't see through the darkness. The easiest thing would be to just quit, to just stop. But as Americans and as Christians, we have to do better than that. We have to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps in order to get back into the game. We have to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and do the next thing. That's all it takes, is just do the next thing during this time of lockdown, during this time of sheltering in place. So I thought we would talk about that a little bit this morning. We're going to go to the Bible and see what the Bible says about getting back into the game. We'll see what the Bible says about doing the next thing. And doing that, we're going to go to the writings of King Solomon. Just to remind you, King Solomon was a young king when he took the throne. He was only 21 years old. He was the third king of Israel. And when he took the throne, he was a young man, so he knew that he was inexperienced. God came to Solomon one night and he said, "Solomon, what do you want?" King Solomon said, "I want wisdom." God was so impressed that he only asked for wisdom, that he didn't ask for gold and for silver and for riches, that God not only blessed Solomon with more wisdom than the world had ever seen and has ever seen since, but he also blessed Solomon with all the riches and glory, the gold and the silver as well. Solomon went on to write the Song of Solomon, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. We're going to go to the book of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes this morning to see what Solomon has to say about doing the next thing. And so the first passage we're going to go to is Proverbs 26:14, where it says, "As the door turns on its hinges, so does the lazy man in his bed." As the door turns on its hinges, so does the lazy man in his bed. I want to tell you, I think about this passage every single morning. Before this COVID thing came and the lockdown came, I had a good routine going. I would get up at 4:30 every morning. Much to Margie's chagrin, I would go to bed early every night at about 8 o'clock every night, so I could get up every morning at 4:30. I would go to bed at 8 o'clock, read the Bible for a half an hour, fall asleep, get up at 4:30, go to the gym, work out, come home, take a shower, head to work. I do that every day. It was automatic. Get up, go to the gym, come home, take a shower, go to work. But ever since this COVID broke out and we've had this shelter in place, I want to tell you that I've worked from home for some days, as many of you have. I've gone in, but there's not as much going on at work now as what there once does, so there's not as much to do. So a lot of times I take long lunches, I come home early, that type of thing. My routine has completely changed since this COVID broke out. And I want to tell you that every morning when that alarm goes off now at 4:30 in the morning, I sit there and think, oh, this bed feels so good. I would love to sleep in this bed for a little bit longer. And then I remember this passage. As the door turns on its hinges, so does the lazy man in his bed. So I get up. I'm working out from home now. I go to my weights, and as I'm standing over those weights, standing in the still of the morning, I think, I just got to do the next thing. I've got to lift that weight, and I've got to get moving. I've got to get this day going. You know, I do this this schedule, this working out every morning. I don't wait till the afternoon to do it. I don't wait till lunch. I don't wait till I get home from work, because it seemed that when I did that, that every time I did that, that not every time, but continually there was something getting in the way of doing the workout. But what I've noticed is that 4:30 in the morning, there's no way they expect anything of you at 4:30 in the morning. So I keep this routine going. Even though it's hard to get out of that bed, and we're in slower times and people aren't expecting things of us that they once expected from us, we've got to keep that routine going. We've got to do the next thing. We've got to move forward. Proverbs 24, verses 33 and 34 says this. It says, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands in rest, so shall your poverty come like a prowler. A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands, so shall your poverty come like a prowler. American aviator Charles Lindbergh, who flew across the Atlantic in 1927, a solo flight. It was the first solo flight ever to fly across the Atlantic. He flew from New York City to Paris, France. Changed aviation forever, because after he made that flight, people knew that this flight could occur across the Atlantic with one plane. No more would people have to take a boat across the Atlantic. They could start flying across the Atlantic. So it changed aviation forever. But even though Charles Lindbergh was an accomplished aviator, seemed to know more than anybody else about aviation, he once said that the way he best learned was by teaching others. The reason being is because when you teach others, people ask questions. You have to go look the questions up. You have to be prepared in order to teach people, so you have to do the research. I've noticed the same in preaching and teaching. I'm required to look things up, to dwell on things, to do the research, to answer the questions. And I want to tell you that this passage is a perfect example of that, because I've always, when I've read that passage before, a little sleep, a little slumber, and your poverty comes like a prowler, I understood that. Because if I'm staying in bed, a little sleep, a little slumber, if I'm staying in bed and I'm hitting that snooze bar several times in the morning, eventually I'm going to be late for work. And when I'm late for work, my boss is going to be mad. And if I do the same thing the next day, I hit that snooze bar 1, 2, 3 times, and I'm late to work again, eventually I'm going to get fired from that job, because my boss is going to be upset because I'm too lazy. I'm not getting up out of bed. But a little folding of the hands to rest, I never understood that. But 2 weeks ago, as I was preparing for this sermon, I was pondering on it. I was doing the research. Came Monday morning, 4:30, the alarm went off, got ready, worked out, came home and showered. And when I got out of the shower and I got dressed, I thought, you know what, there's not a whole lot going on at work today. I think I'm going to go back to bed for a little bit, because Monday mornings, they're hard on me. So I went back to bed, and an hour later, I woke up and I was on my back with my hands folded on my chest. Aha, now I know what that means, a little folding of the hands to rest. I want to tell you, I popped up out of bed and got to work after that. But what this is saying is, you know what, if we just take to our bed, if we just take to our couch, if we just take to our chair, nothing but poverty is going to come from that. Even if you're a student, getting up and going to school, doing that homework, making yourself more and more marketable every day, to eventually you're going to end up and you're going to get a good job, because you have made yourself more marketable by all the education that you've been able to gather throughout the years that you've been growing up and that you've been developing. So no more being lazy. No more folding of the hands to rest. We get up, we do the next thing, we're productive, we move on. You may have had a routine that you had before the COVID broke out, and you may have gotten out of that routine. I encourage you to get back into that routine. Get back into that routine where there was Bible reading in the morning, where there was praying in the morning, cooking breakfast for somebody morning, whatever you were doing in the morning to get your day started, get that day started and get back into that routine. Do the next thing. I notice when I do that, I feel better not only about myself, but I feel better in my body. I just have more energy to do that next thing. But I want to tell you something, doing the next thing is pretty messy. I think back in January where our economy was growing and students were in school and there was a busyness of life, that during that time period, there was a lot of responsibilities for each one of us. It gets busy, it gets messy when we're doing the next thing, as we're taking that next step forward. There's errands to run. There's children to get to school. There's doing homework, there's doing work, there's going to the grocery store, there's doing the dishes, there's mowing the lawn, fixing the fence, all these things that makes it busy, makes it messy. But I encourage you, when it gets back going again, that when we get back going again, embrace the messiness. The reason to embrace the messiness is because thank God that we have the messiness. Some of you may have been laid off during this time period. Thank God that you live in a country where you have the best opportunities to get a job of any country in the world. You have the best education system in the world. And I know we have the best education system in the world because other countries send their students to our country in order to be educated at our universities. And they pay full price to do it. You know, when I was a student, I thought it was more of a job than anything. I never saw it as an opportunity. I never saw it as a privilege. Having that education, the education that we have, the possibilities that we have for education, no other country has. And so even as students, we give thanks that we have this privilege, that we're able to be educated in the country, to make ourselves more marketable, make ourselves smarter, to develop our lives. Proverbs 14:4 says this about the messiness. It says, where no oxen are, the trough is clean, but much increase comes from the strength of an ox. Where no oxen are, the trough is clean, but much increase comes from the strength of an ox. This is the same thing about the messiness of life. You know what? When you don't have an ox in that barn, you can go to that barn, you'll open the doors, you can walk in, look around, everything's clean, everything's in its place. Ah, this is nice. You walk out, you close that barn door, and you walk back into the house. But there's not prosperity coming from that. There's not growth coming from that. There's not productivity coming from that. The only way you get productivity is to put the ox in that barn. But the problem is, when you put the ox in that barn, you're going to have to start cleaning up after the ox. You're going to have to start feeding the ox. The ox is going to bump into things. The ox is going to break things. You're going to have to fix things because of the ox. But through that ox, your fields are getting plowed. Your harvest is coming in because of the ox. So even though things get busy and messy in our lives, that's where the increase comes. That's where the productivity comes as we move forward. As we do take that next step, there might be some thoughts that go through our heads. Thoughts of doubt. Thoughts like, you know what, I don't have a job right now, but I'm too old, nobody's going to hire me. Or I don't have enough experience, they're not going to hire me with the lack of experience that I have. Or I'm too far behind in school, I can't ever catch up. You know, there's always going to be a reason not to do something. But Ecclesiastes 11:4 says this: he who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. He who watches the winds will not sow. He who watches the clouds will never reap. If you're a farmer and you walk out your back door in the morning and you put your finger to your mouth and you stick it up in there and think, it's too windy this morning, I can't plant those seeds, I'm going to go back in and wait for tomorrow. Or if the farmer walks out and sees the clouds rolling in, I can't bring the harvest in today, it's going to be too wet, it's going to rain. If he does that every day, He's not going to be planting a seed. He's not going to be bringing in the harvest because the harvest, because he's always got a reason not to do it. We can always think of a reason not to do something, not to get back in the game, not to do the next thing. But the Lord wants us to do the next thing. Don't think about the reasons why we can't do it, but think of the reasons why we can do it, why we can move forward. I want to tell you, I live my life by this passage. The reason being is because I was taught this at an early age from my father, who was an eternal optimist. Every Sunday after church, it seemed like every Sunday after church when I was growing up. I grew up in Pasadena, Texas. Every Sunday after church, it seemed like during the summertime, my family after church would load up the car and we'd drive down to Galveston. We did this for several years, multiple years. I had a good time down there at Galveston, but there would be some Sunday afternoons where the clouds would be rolling in and my mother would be telling my father, well, I don't think we should go down there today because it's going to rain. And the kids, we'd be saying the same thing, but my father would always say, no, we're going to load up the car and we're going to head down to Galveston. It's going to be great when we get down there. I want to tell you, we did that multiple years, and I can only think of one time that we got down there. There may have been others, but I can only think of one time when we got down to Galveston, and we actually went all the way and drove out onto the beach. We're ready to get out of the car, that the rain was coming down so much that we had to go back home. You know, if we would have watched those clouds all those years, we would have missed out on all that fun down at Galveston. You know, my father even took that into his later life several years ago. It was 10, 15 years ago. I'm not really sure, but Marge and I were living in Clear Lake at the time, and our family was going to go to the Renaissance Festival on a Saturday. Well, the clouds were rolling in on that Saturday morning. Other family members said, nah, we're not going to go. It's going to rain today. It's not going to be fun out there. It's going to be too wet, so we're not going to go. But my father said, well, I'm going because it's going to be fine. So Marge and I, we put him in the back seat, and we drove up to the Renaissance Festival from Clear Lake. And I want to tell you, it rained the entire way up there. And I remember during that trip up there, Margie asked my father, well, what do you think? Don't worry about it. When we get up there, the clouds are going to part. Everything's going to be just fine. And I want to tell you, we got up there, the clouds parted, and it was the best day that we had ever had at the Renaissance Festival. The reason being is because when we got there, everybody else was watching the clouds, so there weren't very many people there. And then also, it was a beautiful day because of what my father said. We're not going to watch the clouds. We're going to keep moving. We're going to do the next thing. We're going to do this. Marge and I lived in Austin. We make these decisions outside of my father now. He's taught us so well. When we lived in Austin, we had an event, our church did, at the park in the local community. And it was going to be free hot dogs in the park on Friday night. Anybody that wants to show up in the community, come on. We put out signs. The praise band from our church was going to sing. We had children's games set up and ready to go. Spent several weeks inviting the community. It came down to that Friday, and it rained all day long. And I want to tell you, Marge and I, we organized the thing so people would call us to ask questions about it all day long. Emails coming in, phone calls coming in. Hey, we're going to do this thing. It's raining. There's a prediction for even more rain. And I quoted this scripture to them. He who watches the clouds will never reap. We're doing it. Well, the event started at 6 o'clock. We had to set up at 5. I'm telling you, at 5 o'clock, those clouds, they parted. We set up, had the event. The community came. It was great. It was fun. It was fantastic. 10 o'clock, it was over, cleaned up. 11 o'clock, we're back home. Started raining again. I'm telling you, the Lord made that event possible. Because we followed his word, because we followed what he said we'd do. We did the next thing. So as we look forward to do the next thing, I'm going to leave you with this. I'm going to leave you with a poem. Most of you know I'm not a poet, I'm not a scholar, but I did come across this poem and I thought it fit for this morning. It's written by a woman by the name of Elizabeth Elliot. She's a Christian author and speaker. I see Karen knows who Elizabeth Elliot is. She's a Christian author and speaker. She died in 2015 at the ripe old age of 88. She was a woman who walked the talk, who walked out the Christian life. She, in 1956, her husband of 3 years was murdered by a tribe in Ecuador that he was a missionary to. Elizabeth Elliot went back to that tribe and was a missionary to that tribe for 2 more years even after that. As I said, she was an author and she was a speaker. I think she was the daughter of a pastor. But she wrote this poem. I'm going to give you a big word before I start the poem. Y'all know I like to use big words, makes me sound smart. It's parsonage. Parsonage is a house that a pastor lives in, a house where a pastor and his family lives in that the church is paying for. I know what a parsonage is because I grew up in a parsonage. So she wrote this. From an old English parsonage down by the sea, there came in the twilight a message to me. Through the doors, the quiet words ring like a low inspiration, do the next thing. Many a questioning, many a fear, many a doubt hath its quieting here. Fear not tomorrow, child of the King. Trust it with Jesus. Do the next thing. Do it immediately. Do it with prayer. Do it reliantly, casting all care. Stayed with omnipotence, safe beneath his wing. Leave all the results. Do the next thing. Looking for Jesus, ever surrender, working or suffering by thy demeanor. Strong in his faithfulness, praise and sing. Then as he beckons, do the next thing. You know what? I can't think of one person in the Bible that ever quit. There was, of course, Barak, who wanted to quit when he was told by the Lord to go fight the army of Canaan. But Deborah kicked him in the backside and told him to do the next thing, to get back in the game, which Barak did. So as we move forward, I'm going to do the next thing. I'm going to do as the Lord asks. I'm going to do as the Lord expects of me. I'm going to do the next thing. So in saying that, I want to leave you with a blessing, and the blessing is from Numbers chapter 6. In Numbers chapter 6, Moses is talking to God, and God tells Moses, tell your brother Aaron to say these words to the people. And when he says these words to the people, they will be blessed. So may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his countenance towards you and give you peace. Amen.